All right, so we are ready, Mayor, whenever you are.
Sorry. I'd like to convene the RTA Audit, Safety, Compliance, and Real Estate Committee. Teresa, please call the roll.
All right, Mayor Kumar,
Here.
Ms. Moss? Here. Mr. Joyce is not here. Ms. McCall?
Here.
And Mayor Weiss. We have 4 committee members present. And just a reminder for the committee to hit your mics whenever you speak so we can record.
I got it. Great. All right. The first item on our list is the Internal Audit Quarterly Report, preliminary review of first quarter 2022 Internal Audit Report. I'm going to turn it over to Tony and your team, I'm assuming.
Thank you, Audit Chair, Mayor Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, Executive Management Team, and no guest yet. Welcome, and this is the second internal audit quarterly. This is for the first quarter of activities, and this is our second meeting of the committee. And I'm proud to say that we have a full team of auditors, and they're going to be proud to share their work with everyone today. And I'm going to turn it over to Anthony Ganem, our audit manager, who's going to lead this through.
All right, good morning, Chairperson Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, members of management, and anyone who's listening virtually. My name is Anthony Ganem. I'm the audit manager with the Internal Audit Department, and I'm going to walk you through, on a high level, the format for today's meeting, starting with a slide that will cover what we're going to go through today, how we're going to do it, and who's going to present it. Before we begin, I'd like to at least acknowledge 2 persons that were not here physically the first time we met at the first meeting. The first being our information technology auditor, Andrew Scott. And the second is our newest hire, our staff auditor, Darren Garlock. Darren and Andrew will introduce themselves as they come up here later in the presentation. Okay, so as Tony briefly mentioned, this is our second committee meeting. The first meeting was a bit of an introductory meeting to the committee as well as members of management. We have a format in place. We hope to standardize this format going forward, and we will begin with our 2022 audit plan. We're going to cover in the sequence as follows on the screen: completed projects, talk to you a little bit about continuous auditing, and introduce you to what scripting involves and what some of our outputs there involve. We're going to look at projects in progress, special requests and emerging issues, external audit coordination, status of outstanding follow-up, other projects in progress, staff training, and staff profiles. All the information we're going to cover today can be found in our quarterly report, which will be provided at the board meeting. The presentation style is going to be a little different. In the past, I think between Tony and to some extent myself, we've generally been up here presenting. This time around and going forward, we will be more inclusive of everybody involved. So each and every staff member who worked on a particular project or took the lead on a project will be presenting their own projects for all the sections above. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Steven Zimmerman, our lead auditor, who will begin the 2022 audit plan presentation.
Thank you, Anthony. Good afternoon, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, members of the Executive Management Team, and those joining us virtually. As Anthony said, my name is Steven Zimmerman, and I am the lead auditor in the Internal Audit Department. Before we jump into the projects that have been completed in the first quarter, we wanted to take this opportunity to present to the board a little bit of the behind the scenes of some of the work that we do through the lens of our risk control matrix. The risk control matrix is an audit tool that we use that can help us plan, execute, and record the results of our audits. It starts by identifying, the functional area that we're auditing. In this case, I'm showing an example of a fare box inventory audit. We identify the objectives that management has set out in relation to the audit and what risks might exist that could impede achievement of those objectives. Then we'll identify what is called the inherent risk rating. What is the risk to the objective in an environment where there's no controls or the controls are unknown? We rank those based on likelihood and impact, and that gives us an overall rating. And based on the rating of those risks, we'll identify whether or not they'll be included in testing. Most risks at the authority are mitigated by controls that have been implemented by management, and we also document those. And our testing relates back to whether those controls are designed effectively or working as intended. After the conclusion of our testing, then we'll know whether they are working as designed or whether they're effective or not. And then they'll be given a residual risk rating. What is the risk after we account for controls? If a control is designed effectively, working as intended, then in most cases the residual risk will decrease. If we identify any issues based on the result of our testing, we communicate those in our reports and we share those with management, issues and recommendations for implementation. We're not going to go through all of these, but I just thought if I could take you through the topmost one to just give you a flavor of it, and then you'll also see this project among many more in our completed projects. So for this one, we identified that there was risk of uncontrolled fare box inventory. We rated the likelihood as possible, but the impact high, which means that if someone were to get their hands on some of our fare boxes, that could be a big financial impact to the company. The control for this is tracking in our maintenance management system, also known as Ultramain, where we inventory how many fare boxes we have and where they are and when their changes are made to them. So we went out and did a survey, a sample of our fare boxes to determine, okay, are the records in our maintenance management system accurate? We did identify some issues, but overall the controls were effective and working, and that reduced that residual risk. And when issues were identified, we did share those with management. So this is a template for what the completed project section is going to look like. So for every audit, we'll tell you what the audit was, what the objective was. Under the scope section, that will usually describe the testing that was undertaken. And then every audit is given an opinion from the audit department. And the four that we have, the four categories that exist, are satisfactory, marginally satisfactory, marginally unsatisfactory, or unsatisfactory. And we take these definitions and terms from the Sawyer's Guide for Internal Auditing. And finally, we also may or may not have issues for board level consideration. The majority of issues that we identify in our audits are appropriate for management intervention, and we work with management directly to give them our recommendations. But in some special circumstances, whether they're very material or just high-profile issues, we might want to present them to you today. And you'll see that some of the completed projects that we have will be for board consideration. I'm now going to turn it over to Staff Auditor Molly O'Donnell, who's going to start us through the completed projects, and then she'll progress through the other auditors that completed their work.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Mayor Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, and members of the Executive Management Team. The first completed audit that I will discuss was the fare box inventory audit. Our objective for this audit was to evaluate controls over inventory and the physical security of our fare boxes and the components of the fare boxes. Our scope for this audit were inventory records in our maintenance management system of fare boxes and logic boards, the integrity of fare collection data, cyber lock and cyber keys, which govern access to the fare box mechanical components, and bullet keys, which allow access to open the cash box. So for this audit, we expanded significant efforts to inventory the fare boxes. We validated the location of a sample of fare boxes that are on our vehicles, so buses and light rail. Our sample was 10% of approximately 450 vehicle fare boxes. 100% of our sample reconciled against the inventory records. We were also able to validate the location of 100% of the approximately 200 fare boxes that are stored on the mezzanine at our central bus maintenance location. Finally, we validated the location of fare boxes at rail stations, districts, and other standalone fare boxes like that. Some of those fare box locations remain outstanding, but We've met with management and they accepted our recommendations and they're working to locate those fare boxes. We also determined that controls around the inventory and handling of components were effective. Thus, our results for this audit were satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management, and there were no issues for board consideration from this audit. Next, I'll discuss our tire lease and maintenance audit. This was an audit of our current contract with Michelin for tires and the runout of the previous contract with Goodyear. Our objective for this audit was to evaluate compliance with the terms and conditions of the contract with Michelin and to document and evaluate the management controls in place to ensure compliance with the contract. Our scope for this audit was invoicing from Michelin and invoicing for the Goodyear runout, communications and reporting from Michelin, completion of tire inspections and tire maintenance activities, spare tire inventory, scrap tire disposal for Michelin and the Goodyear runout, and staffing. We identified a contract compliance issue with Michelin around reporting, but this was addressed during the course of the audit. An additional finding was that while Michelin was using lug locks, RTA was not using lug locks. This causes a potential safety issue as lug locks are a control to ensure that tire retorques are completed. Otherwise, risk exists that lug nuts could come loose on coaches' wheels. And we have met with management about this issue, and they accepted our recommendations and are addressing that issue. Additionally, contract management was transferred from fleet engineering to supply chain mid-audit, which addressed some of the other contract management concerns. So our results for this audit were marginally satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management, and there were no issues for board consideration. The next audit was an audit of the sales agent program. Our objective for this audit was to evaluate the effectiveness of the sales agent program, identify and test management controls in the sales agent program, and determine if the program is achieving our business goals and objectives for the program. Our scope of the audit included consignment agreements, invoicing to the sales agents, RTA fulfillment of fare card and fare media orders, program growth, and an evaluation of the geographic distribution of sales agents. So we found that approximately 36 of the 80 sales agents were missing consignment agreements. However, we met with management and they're actively working to rectify that. We also found that there has been expansion of the sales agent program in recent years, but it's limited. However, there are factors that could prevent expansion of the sales agent program, like significant liability insurance requirements, a cost of processing credit cards that exceeds the sales commission on tickets, and low commissions that are so low that they don't incentivize sales agents joining the program. Our results for this audit were marginally satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management, and there were issues for board consideration that I will detail on the next slide. So there were two issues for board consideration from this audit. The first issue is that sales agents have not adopted 1- and 2-trip fare cards. These 1- and 2-trip fare cards are significant as they were a result of the fare equity study. The 1- and 2-trip fare cards provide transfer privileges, whereas a 1-ride fare does not. So that addressed concerns of the fare equity study over inability to transfer. The second issue for board consideration that we identified from this audit was an uneven geographic distribution of sales agents. That also has implications for the fare equity study, as sales agents and the customer service center are the only places that customers can buy the 1- and 2-trip fare cards.
Quick question. Was there a reason those fare cards weren't adopted? Okay, thanks. Sorry.
So I created these maps to explore the geographic distribution of the sales agents And I have a map on the 1 and 2 trip fare cards, and I can discuss a little bit more of the reasoning for why they weren't adopted there. So these first 2 maps I created to just explore the data. The one on the left side is public transit usage by census tract as a proportion, and the sales agent locations are plotted over that in the black dots. On the right side, it's a kernel density map showing the density of sales agents, and you can see that's concentrated over downtown. So the patterns in the data and the implications for fare equity became more clear when we did a buffer analysis. So the white space in this map, those are the sales agent locations and a half-a-mile radius around the sales agent locations. So the white space, those white dots, are the locations in the county where a person who lives there can walk half a mile and have access to a sales agent selling our fare media. So you can see on this map, there are significant areas of the city of Cleveland that are relatively high ridership in some of the inner ring suburbs on the east side that do not have easy walking distance access to a sales agent, meaning that they would have to either go to one of those other sales agent locations or come to customer service center to buy that paper fare media or buy it on board. And there's several census tracts that have public transit usage, about 50%, that don't have a half-a-mile access to sales agent locations, which are those red census tracts that you can see there. For this map, I separated out the sales agent locations that have ordered the 1 and 2 trip fare cards. And those are those 4 white dots. And instead of doing a half-a-mile radius, I did a 1-mile radius to be a little bit more generous. So there are only 4 sales agents that have ordered the fare equity fare cards. And they're all in suburban locations. At the northeast edge of Cuyahoga County, that's a Sunoco and Euclid. There's a Market District in Solon, and the other 2 are a Giant Eagle and a Discount Drug Mart. So nearly, if not all, of the city of Cleveland, where many people who rely on public transit live, does not have access to the fare media that came out of the fare equity study, those 1 and 2 trip fare cards. Possible reason that these 1 and 2 trip fare cards have not been adopted is that the commissions for them are relatively low, pennies, maybe 5 or 6 cents. I'd have to double check to the fare policy. And that generally does not cover the credit card transactions on that fare media. So we've met with management about these findings specific to the fare equity study, and they've accepted our findings and are actively working to address them. Additionally, management mentioned to us that the new fare collection mobile app system might help address some of these fare equity findings. So looking to that in the future to meet the findings of the fare equity study. The final completed audit that I'll discuss is the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan. The objective for this audit was to evaluate organizational compliance with the procurement sections in the GCRTA Public Transit Agency Safety Plan. Our scope for this audit was to verify that the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan procurement sections comply with FDA and ODOT requirements and validate that GCRTA is adhering to those requirements for procurement that are in our PTASP. So we took a sample of the contracts that were considered safety sensitive and thus the procurement sections applied to them. In our sample, all of the contracts had the relevant safety specifications included, so there was 100% compliance within the sample. Additionally, we sampled contracts requiring safety department sign-off, and procurement provided evidence of safety department sign-off for 100% of our contracts in the sample. Thus, our results for this audit were satisfactory with no findings, and there are no issues for board consideration from this audit. So I'll turn it over to Laura Crawshaw, staff auditor, to discuss her completed audits.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Kumar, members of the committee, and members of the executive management team. The next project that was completed last quarter is our annual petty cash audit. The objective is to reconcile all active GCRTA petty cash accounts in accordance with Administrative Procedure 003, which requires our department to complete an annual review of all accounts. The 16 accounts that were counted had no underages discovered and few small overages were found, but nothing significant. The administration of petty cash documentation needs improvement with some deficiencies identified. One account could not be located, but the amount is immaterial. Thus, our result was marginally satisfactory with those findings and recommendations for management, but no issues for board consideration. I'll now hand it off to Darren Garlock to discuss other completed projects.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, members of the Executive Management Team, and guests. Internal Audit reviews 100% of all travel reimbursement requests using the updated 2020 travel policy. Any exceptions to the procedure are returned for correction before being submitted for final approval. For vehicle purchases, Internal Audit completes all pre-award and post-delivery reviews in accordance with federal regulations. As an added value, we also perform functional testing of all customer-facing systems prior to the vehicle getting released into revenue service. All 16 of the new Healthline coaches are in revenue service and are in compliance with federal regulations. For the Gillig replacements that are headed to Triscuit, 14 of the 20 comply with federal regulations and are ready and are service ready. And now I'd like to introduce Andrew Scott, who is going to discuss our continuous auditing process.
Good afternoon, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, General Manager, CEO Birdsong, and executive team.
Andrew, I'm sorry, if you'd speak into the microphone.
Sorry. I'm usually on the other end of it. Starting in 2016, we started the development of a continuous auditing program. And the high-level definition of continuous auditing is the usage of automatic methods to perform auditing activities, to perform control and risk assessments on more frequent bases. So we can perform 100% analyses of different types of data in the authority. Continuous auditing is a cyclical process, so we work with management to determine what needs they have, what they would like us to look at. We determine the risks to look at, and once we have those risks, we develop test scripts to perform an analysis of that data. We run those scripts, and it flags the data for us to perform further analysis and be able to report out and then begin that cycle all over again. We have a number of scripts that we are currently running and several that are in development. We have the purchasing card script. We use this by pulling data from sources such as the PNC Bank for the purchasing cards and run a number of different tests on them for a 100% analysis on all transactions. We also quarterly perform a fair revenue reconciliation in which we compare all the data from our fare collection systems, the bank, our cash in transit, our third-party cash in transit vendor, and all the way down to our general ledger. We also perform a nepotism audit to identify potential relationships within the authority that may have conflicts of interest in the management structure. Paratransit customer accounts, we pull data from our customer database and we compare it to information that we get from the Ohio Department of Vital Statistics so that we can ensure that any deceased passengers can be removed from our database so that only non-deceased persons are able to book rides on our services. Currently in development, we have an accounts payable and accounts receivable script to ensure that we are both making and receiving payments on time, making sure that we're not duplicating payments, making sure that we're not overpaying anything. And also fuel expense to analyze the amount that we're spending on fuel and to ensure that it is compliant with our fuel contracts. I'll have Randy Bowles come up. He is our IT specialist auditor, and he is responsible for the development and running of all of our continuous audit scripts.
Good afternoon, Audit Chair Mayor Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, members of the audience, and anyone who might be tuning in from home. What we have up here is a slide that represents, the big picture of what the fare collection audit does. And essentially what it does is it ensures to management that all money that's collected through the ticket vending machines, onboard customer service, the kiosks or credit cards, all that money is booked to the banks, collected and deposited to the banks, and booked to the general ledger, as we expect it to be done. And if you notice up there, I put little arrows that go down to just a little picture of a computer. And what that shows is, everything is collected into a database. And each one of those databases, at least for banks, and a general ledger, there is like an online portal that we download all this information to. And for the ticket vending machines, we have literally a direct link to the database. And we gather all this information and we run scripts, our continuous audit scripts that do hit 100% of the transactions. And for quarter 1, 2022, there were over 381,000 transactions. And that takes about 2 minutes to run. Now, of course, it takes a little bit longer to kind of gather the information and do analysis on it, but the actual running of it takes less than 2 minutes. And I'll do a demonstration of that later on. And these are some high-level results from that continuous audit script. And for general ledger and the banks, we have 100% match of what we expect to see. Now for the Brinks collection, it's showing 2%, and that's still within our error rate. But the management does not accept the accounting method for that. So to kind of account for some of that, we do 100% count of the dollars collected coming in through the fare box. But the overall error rate is below what we expect. The next slide here is a PNC purchase card. That's another continuous audit that we do. And I'm not going to go through all of them here because I'm going to demonstrate some of them and go through some of the key points. But the point I want to highlight here is it highlights potential non-compliance to our procurement process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a demo, and it's better visually, if I kind of minimize the presentation because it's going to kind of get in the way. So I'm going to try to, bear with me a minute. I'm going to end the slideshow here. Okay, this here, let me make sure okay, it's open. Hold on a second. Okay, so this is the full script that's running now. And you can see, if you look over here to the left, you can kind of make out some of the scripts that it's actually running over here. And then over here on the screen, you can see as it kind of parses through all the transactions. And I've kind of masked the names to protect the people's privacy. But just because your name shows up in here doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. You just got flagged by one of the transactions. And there are 9,639 transactions that's going over for 6 quarters of data, because we've been short-staffed lately, so this process hasn't been ran, so we're trying to go back and catch everything up. And it should just take a few seconds for it to finish. All right, it's done. So I'm going to start this presentation again. And then what this highlights is a total spend for those quarters that I talked about, with the average of $139,366. And this highlights the purchases, and the blue bar going across shows a dollar amount by quarter, and the numbers over the orange line show the actual number of transactions. And purchases over 25 are something we want to pay attention to, because there's certain procurement steps that they need to follow, like certain documentation, maybe they need to get multiple bids, and we want to make sure that these things were done. And since we were short-staffed a little bit, we are going to go back and look at each and every one of those transactions to make sure the proper paperwork was turned in. And the same thing on avoiding approvals. That might be something that's like right at a key level. Just a little bit more, it might require some documentation. So this is just flagging those types of transactions that are slightly below that. And we will be pulling all these quarters 100% to make sure the work was done on those, the proper procurement process. And the last one is top 10 vendors. I don't think we do any audit on it, but we just wanted to show this to kind of show what our top 10 vendors are. And one thing that stands out is Amazon. And Amazon, we actually get discounts for purchasing at Amazon. We also get tax. We don't pay taxes on purchases from Amazon. So I thought this was something that management might want to take a look at for some of these other entities up here, to maybe get the same type of situation set up. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Randy. Allow me to just briefly explain to you the template for the next section we'll be discussing, which is projects in progress. Again, we'll be describing the audits, their objectives, and the scope if they've reached the set portion of our audit process where a scope has been defined. So usually we will not identify our testing until the risk assessment is complete. Also, for each audit, we'll outline whether it's in the planning and risk assessment phase, which is where we plan the audit, do our preliminary interviews with management, obtain preliminary data, and identify the risks and controls that we'll include in the risk control matrix I showed you earlier. Once the planning and risk assessment is done, that's when we develop our testing and field work. And then once the testing program has been executed and completed, we move into the reporting phase. And allow me to emphasize that we may be in a point where an audit is complete and the report is drafted, but if we have not yet met with management and offered them an opportunity to present their management response to us, it would still be considered a project in progress. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Molly, who will start with her projects, and we'll go back down the line of auditors who completed their work.
The first project in progress that I have to discuss is our advertising services audit, which is an audit of our contract with Brokaw Inc. for advertising agency services. Our objective for this audit is to evaluate contract compliance with the scope of services and compliance with the invoice requirements. We've completed the planning and risk assessment phase for this audit, but we have not begun the testing and fieldwork phase and have not fully outlined the tests, so the scope for this audit is to be determined. The next project in progress that I have to discuss is our audit of the revenue-generating ad services, which is an audit of our contracts with Lamar Transit for shelters and vehicle and stations, and our contract with Pepsi Bottling Company. Our objective for this audit is to obtain and review all revenue-generating ad contracts, identify terms and conditions for each contract, and validate revenue streams for each contract. So Lamar has a minimum annual guarantee in their contract, and there has been several change orders to reduce the minimum annual guarantee due to the pandemic. If we exceed that minimum annual guarantee, the authority should receive contractual compensation. So part of validating the revenue streams for the Lamar contracts will include looking at the minimum annual guarantee and the compensation we've received. We've completed planning and risk assessment for this audit, but have also not begun testing or fieldwork for this audit, so the scope is to be determined. And I'll turn it over to Laura to discuss her projects in progress.
So the first project in progress I will discuss is an audit of facilities access with keys. This is a part of a group of audits of physical security and access requested by the General Manager CEO. The objective is to evaluate compliance with Administrative Procedure 053 key control. The scope is key issuance and return, lost or stolen keys, key watcher controls, high authority and restricted area keys, and the track switch key inventory. The track switch key inventory was evaluated separately because it was discovered that the track switch keys are not governed by this administrative procedure. The audit is in the reporting phase. We are just awaiting responses from management. So the next project is an audit of our employee separation process. The objective is to define the current process, evaluate its controls, and identify areas of improvement. The scope is asset tracking through release forms, IT access termination, calculation of payouts and arrears, pre-termination hearings, and the timeliness to process all of these things. This audit is in the late stages of fieldwork and moving into reporting. So lastly, I have an audit of the cycle counting program. So cycle counting is an accepted alternative to an annual physical inventory. And last year, the state auditor determined that the inventory is material to our financial statements. So this year, we are coordinating with their office to minimize duplication of efforts in the review. The objective is to evaluate the processes and controls supporting the 2021 cycle count program. And the scope is validation of asset value classification, cycle count sheet review, IT input controls, physical security controls, year-end reporting accuracy, and inventory valuation. This audit is currently in the fieldwork stage. I will now hand it off to Darren to discuss his project in progress.
I will now discuss the cash collections audit currently in progress. The handling of cash is a high-risk item per our annual risk assessment. RTA has several cash collection sites. Where employees are required to receive, record, and remit to accounting for cash handling. We've identified 4 such sites and are in the process of documenting and evaluating controls for the collection and deposit of cash. We will be wrapping up the planning risk phase soon. And I will now turn it over to Andrew to discuss the consolidated train dispatch system.
We've recently completed the audit of the consolidated train dispatch system, and the report has been issued to management, and we are waiting on management response. The objective of this audit was to review the administration of the system and to ensure that controls are in place for effective system operations, as well as reviewing the daily operations of the system, including the procedures for system outages. The scope of this included reviewing the system administration and the back-end functions of the system, as well as meeting with members of the service quality team for the day-to-day operations of it and the system failure procedures, both on the back end and the customer-facing side. I like pictures, so here we have a screenshot of the system itself. What we see here is the Tower City West portal. For those of you in your room, all these white lines are the different tracks. Then we have the switches, the different signals, and all the different wayside equipment that is able to be controlled remotely by service quality. Part of the audit being the system failure procedures. If the system is ever to go down and we're not able to get it up immediately, we have to have service quality supervisors dispatched along the entire rail system on the right-of-way to these emergency control panels. This one right here is in Tower City, and you can't really tell because it's far away, but this controls the entirety of the Tower City track, all the way to, I believe, past West 25th to East 34th. I'm also working on the Transit Police body cam implementation. We met with Transit Police management earlier this week, and they are moving forward from the pilot steps of the program into the final implementation. We've worked with them and identified a number of things that we will continue working on them into a post-implementation phase of the audit. And the scope of this covers the compliance with the procurement contracts, as well as any relevant legal standards, the transit police and authority policies, records retention policies, and the processes for the chain of custody of information for public records requests. So moving forward with this audit into the post-implementation phase, Transit Police will be issuing, they will finish issuing the cameras to the officers and continue working on the system with tests such as network load testing, and moving forward with records requests and working closely with the legal department to ensure smooth transitions of data. We are also going to be beginning an IT change management project, and the objective of this is to review that controls are in place for effective and safe changes being made to the IT environments. We have an initial scope of reviewing the different policies, procedures, and practices in place for both hardware and software for installations, replacements, upgrades, patches, emergency security patches, as well as functional modifications, and then finally the rollbacks of anything that may have gone wrong. Next up, we have Stephen to discuss the heavy rail motor home.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to describe the last two featured projects in progress on the behalf of our team because these are larger group projects where there's more staff involved. For the heavy rail motor overhaul, the board may be aware that we are experiencing a substantial issue with our heavy rail motors on the track, where they are subject to an excessive number of smoking motor incidents and subsequent failures. So with the collaboration of rail equipment, GCRTA, quality assurance, the safety department, and engineering, we are evaluating the evolving HRV smoking motor issue, and the scope for this audit includes contract compliance with the recently awarded Swiger Motor overhaul contract, where they will be overhauling 100% of our heavy rail motors. Review of the quality assurance review process that the GCRTA quality assurance team will be undertaking for receiving those repaired motors, as well as an evaluation of our third-party engineering services task order, which will be evaluating potential catenary and OCS implications for the motors out when they're operating on the track. And this audit is currently in the fieldwork phase. We're also involved in the railcar procurement that the authority is undergoing. We have numerous positions as non-voting members on the proposal that's currently underway, proposal review. And our objective for this is to provide pre-award audit assurance on procurement activities and to complete necessary Buy America reviews. We are validating that GCRTA is adhering to federal and state procurement regulations. We're also preparing for the pre-award Buy America audit that will be required for the rail cars, as we would do for any rolling stock. We will carry this audit forward from the pre-award stage through to the post-award and then the post-delivery. Finally, for completeness' sake, these are the remainder of our projects in progress. We're not going to go into detail on them here, but I would invite you to please review the quarterly report where you can find additional details on them inside. We're now going to transition to special requests and emergent issues, and Molly O'Donnell will take this one.
So this was an audit of our third-party telecommunication and data services with AT&T. Our objective for this audit was to evaluate third-party telecommunications and data services invoices per a request from the Director of Procurement. Our scope for testing were invoice records from February 2020 through September 2021, and financial management system records from 2014 through the present. Our results from this audit were unsatisfactory, and we identified 2 issues for board consideration. I want to emphasize that while we have completed testing and drafted a report for this audit, we have not issued the final report, and we will be including responses from management and stakeholders in that report and meeting with them to get those responses. So the 2 issues for board consideration were that the amount spent on the AT&T purchase order exceeded the contract amount, and the AT&T purchase order spending on that purchase order exceeded the contract duration. And I'll detail these 2 issues on the next slide. So while reconciling the invoices in our testing scope to the financial management system records, I identified issues related to the spend on the 2014 to 2019 AT&T contract. The 2014 AT&T contract was for a wide scope of AT&T services, each with their own terms. And as I said, that contract lasted for, it had a 5-year term. So notice to proceed was given in 2014, and it would have expired in June 2019. So the issues that we identified are summarized within this table. On the left side of the table, that summarizes how we achieved the total contract authorization amount. So there was an original contract amount not to exceed $2,129,573. There were 4 change orders that are listed there, reaching a total contract authorization amount of approximately $2.34 million. On the right side of the table, that's the support for the 2 issues that I identified. The first line is the authorized payment amount, that $2.34 million that comes from the left side of the table. The second line, payments exceeding contract amount during the contract period. Payments to AT&T exceeded that authorized $2.342 million by $34,000 during the contract period. So we overspent the AT&T contract prior to June 2019 by $34,000. Following the June 2019 expiration of that contract, RTA continued to spend on the purchase order for that contract. So we identified $318,495 of payments that exceeded the contract authorization amount after the contract period ended, achieving a total payment amount of $2.695 million, $350,000 or so in excess of that contract authorization amount of $2.342 million. While reconciling the invoices to the financial management system reports, we also identified that the contract has been unbundled to separate services with different terms onto separate purchase orders, meaning management can better monitor the spend and duration. So management has already begun to address some of the root causes that led to these issues. We're also working with management to introduce a change order for the payments in excess of the original contract authorization, and management will seek ratification from the board for this change order. I'll turn it over to Anthony Garofoli to discuss the remainder of the special requests and emerging issues.
Thank you, Molly. And as we said in our audit planning process in February when we came to the board, we always reserve 10 to 15% of our person hours for special requests and emerging issues that, whether that be management or the board or someone may bring forward to us, or perhaps we learn through our fraud hotline. So during the quarter, we actually issued 3 special audit reports or special investigation reports. This first, employee time and attendance. There was an overpayment of some compensation. We brought that to the attention of management. An agreement was put in place, and that recovery is going forward. Root cause was identified, and management has mitigated those risks. In terms of main office building garage repairs, this is the garage that some of you may park in. There was an engineering study that was recently done. There is both a short-term and a long-term plan. The short-term plan was completed to make that garage safe and to address some of the corrective actions down there, but there's a long-term plan that is forthcoming. The third is a purchasing card audit that we completed. There was some non-compliance by an individual here at the authority. Management addressed these issues, recovering all of the property that was purchased with the purchasing card, and the employee has subsequently resigned. These other 4 projects, this is the IT director hiring process, a special request from the Ohio Department of Transportation and an operator complaint to ODOT, an employee background check that the CFO, Raj Gautam, and India Birdsong, our general manager CFO, requested. And then we have another fraud hotline tip, which is an employee overtime tip. We are in the process of completing that work. They are in progress, and we'll report on those as those projects mature. External audit coordination, is this you, Anthony, or is this me? I'll continue. So part of our role at the authority is to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts with our external auditors, and we also have maximum risk coverage. And there's also, and with some of our auditors, we pay them, so try to minimize some of those costs for the authority. In this case, working with the state auditor's office, they will rely on some of our work. They are currently completing their field work for the 2021 single audit, working with Raj's team and many others throughout the authority. The board should expect that a draft presentation to them in executive session, I believe in June. Thank you, Raj. The other item is the Federal Transit Administration completed a triennial review of the Ohio Department of Transportation State Safety Oversight Program. And in doing so, they issued a report to our management with some recommendations. Our safety department is managing those recommendations, and I think we received the report on March the 28th. I believe the safety department has already coordinated some corrective action responses, and they will be processed through the general manager's office in response to the FTA. All right, status of outstanding follow-up. All right, I'll continue. Anytime that we issue a report and there's items for management to address, we utilize our computerized audit management system. That system is tied into our email system at the authority. We then communicate with we certainly have an exit conference, share formally what those issues are, and then we can then manage status and follow-up and implementation, ultimately going out and validating corrective actions completed before anything's closed out. So this is just I didn't include it in the presentation, but we usually have in your book you'll find a snapshot of that system at any particular time with what's outstanding and management is addressing. This is one of our standards to make sure that we follow up on recommendations through closeout. Other projects that we have on the books we are replacing that audit management system I just referred to. We sought budget, we received it, we have a sole source provider. We're going to replace this old management system that we've been using now for about 16, 17 years with a new modern system. And we look forward to that. We're in the demo phase at this point, and as this thing rolls out, we hope to include some more visuals and some more modernized reporting as we share with management and the board. We wanted to point out that we are going to be engaging with a healthcare audit consultant to co-source some of the work. The authority spends approximately $32 million a year on healthcare expenses for our employees. This is a combination of medical expenses, pharmacy, dental, and so forth. We have an existing audit software that we use to program our plan design into and the formularies that we allow for drugs and pharmacy. And then all of the claims that our employees generate as they go to the doctors and so forth are filtered through this software. And then where we identify that there are some anomalies or some non-compliance with our plan design, then we can follow up with our third-party administrators and try to recover those dollars. Could be a duplication of payment, could be a misclassification where a male had a hysterectomy and it was coded incorrectly, those kinds of things, and they happened. So we want to stay on top of it. Our scope will be approximately 2 years. We haven't done this in a while, so we look forward to engaging that consultant who will update our software with diagnostic codes and procedure codes from the American Medical Association and our current plan designs, and then we'll move forward. Continuing on other projects, we do manage an active fraud hotline, and you saw that some of those end up into our special requests and emerging issues. We address everything. When we get a tip, we will address it. We have two ways of getting tips. One is through a phone call. We also have a text portion through the intranet and internet sites. We're a member of a number of steering committees, always non-voting, so we can share our broad-based knowledge. And where we see that there's risks, these steering committee chair people and stakeholders can request that we perform some internal consulting, or in the case, maybe we have to do an audit. Staff training, we have some requirements. We have a number of people here that either have certifications or are seeking certifications. And then we want to make sure that we stay abreast of industry standards for auditing, investigations, and information technology. So we have a pretty robust training program. We try to take advantage of the local chapters in town so that we can keep the costs down, and then we can network with some of the local people and learn from them. They can learn from us. And then we wanted to talk about that we have some new people here, And we want to make sure that they receive some more formalized training through the Institute of Internal Audit. We've developed a program, we're seeking budget, and we hope to execute that over the next couple of years to get some of our newer people fully trained up. That concludes the presentation from our group. We were happy to give that presentation today. And, you know, we didn't hear some questions during it, but if you have some questions that you wrote down, we will be happy to entertain, and I'll invite my coworkers to come up and fill in where I don't know the answer.
Tony, I just had a question back on the AT&T expenditures. Is there and I don't know this is a management question or not, India, what's the timeline expectation for that to come in front of the board?
Well,
We
we're
have that
meeting
yet?
with some stakeholders next week.
Okay.
And again, I wanted to emphasize that this was a request from our Director of Procurement.
Yep.
And we were working with her team. In speaking with Melinda recently, she's thinking about a June, maybe a July, but hopefully a June change order for ratification.
Okay, thank you. And then second question, once this was identified, at that point moving forward, are we in compliance with the amounts that were appropriated and following the purchase orders?
As Molly O'Donnell described, the procurement department implemented some of their own risk mitigations.
Great.
With the different products that are sold to us through AT&T,
Okay.
where they've established different purchase orders to better monitor the spend in compliance with those particular agreements and those particular product scopes and terms and conditions. So the answer is yes going forward,
Great.
although we have some outstanding invoices that management needs to address, and they are in the process of doing that.
Great, thank you. And last question, has this been communicated to our external auditors?
This particular matter, I have not met with the external auditors yet. I have a meeting with the external auditors I think it's Thursday of next week, for all of the issues that we're working with them on, and I will bring this up.
Great, thanks so much.
Welcome.
Tony, if I could just piggyback on your answer, which I do agree with is accurate. So Mayor Kumar, this was a good example, I think, of particularly the invoicing process for the IT division to be able to take a second look and a third look and a fourth look at how we actually process that. So that this particular contract, in addition to just overall assignment of invoices, and it's not to make it sound simplistic, but where do they go so they don't sit on someone's desk? How do we reconcile it? All of those kind of things, in utilization of, I think, the administrative support that's attached to that department, rather than depending solely on maybe a project manager that maybe needs additional training, was part of the conversation that came out of this. So I'm looking forward to it coming before the board, but not only that, but just our internal processes through procurement to make sure that we also have a better handle on our spend. Yeah.
Press down, just hold it until it turns green.
Got it. Just a couple follow-up questions. One is, I think that the contract ended in 2019.
Correct.
Is there like control systems in there that says that like you get a pop-up that the contract is over? And I guess that's more of a Melinda question, is that.
We call that an alert.
Right.
And so there are some programmed and embedded alerts within the financial management system. And as part of this study, both the procurement team and us are looking at that alert to make sure that it's in place and working effectively.
Because it's for everything,
Any contract.
We vote, right, because we vote on all these contracts for all the period of 5 years, and was there no system in place on that, or did this one that is slipped through the cracks?
Well, the system is in place, the control is in place, but as Molly was describing, some of the products that the authority purchased from the AT&T, they may have been 2 or 3 year products, and they started, let's just say the contract began in 2014, the product didn't start until 2017, so that 3 years would surpass the end of the agreement. And there are many products that were purchased. It's a complex master agreement, and that's why procurement unbundled it, so they can better monitor the products and the spend.
Okay, and then the follow-up to that is, so it's going to come back to the board, but these payments have already been made?
Correct.
So we're going to go back and do a purchase order on something that's already happened?
The,
I mean,
the
I don't
purchase
really
order was,
need our
the
authority.
purchase order was complete. Some of the expenditures were emergency-based. You know, when AT&T calls and says, we're turning off a service that, or a product that we depend on to deliver revenue service, that qualifies as an emergency. So our general manager, CEO, did provide authorization in those cases. In other cases, it is different, but the monies were spent, the purchase order was established. This is now going back and ratifying and providing authorization for that expenditure, making it legal.
Okay. I mean, money's already been spent, so that's fine, thanks.
Here you go. Thank you. This may or may not be a question directly for you, Tony, but more on the healthcare claim software. Question, just refresh my recollection. We're self-insured?
We are self-insured.
Okay, and so this is the software that we're talking about is
This is software that Internal Audit purchased a number of years ago.
okay.
And the third-party administrators that process our claims, we have one for medical, they're in a joint venture for another one with the pharmacy. They provide us masked, so HIPAA-protected,
Right.
claims on a quarterly basis, so that we can filter those claims through the software, and then we can look for non-compliance with our plan designs. So it's an internal audit software, but we need it updated because each year or each period or cycle, the American Medical Association will update procedure codes, diagnostic codes, and then each year, management here, in combination with the union agreement and with management, will change or update the plan design for medical and the formulary for drugs. So all that has to take place before we can then just simply take those claims and drop it through.
And our third-party administrator is?
Our current third-party administrator is Medical Mutual of Ohio, and they are in joint venture with Express Scripts, who provides our pharmacy benefit management.
Yep, got it. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other
I do
any
have
other
one
questions?
question. I know that one of the things that over the years that we've looked at, and I saw it up there, but I didn't see a report on it, was about nepotism.
Yes.
I mean, that was something that we've been working on, and I guess I want to re-alert
yes.
newer audit members that we had some serious issues in the past about that, and this is a continuous auditing, so is there an update on that? Are we clean?
We are, let me start over again. Our collective bargaining agreements have different periods of time for different job classifications where they'll pick where they can work. So depending on when that pick occurs and where those employees land, we have to time up our script to evaluate that landing point. Then we can then work with human resources and say, this person is potentially working in an area where there's a conflict, where there's in violation of our code of ethics, where there's a relative that may live in the same household or something to that nature. We also have a control in place for folks who onboard and fill out an application to where they need to disclose those relationships. So we're relying on that control. And then during our healthcare enrollment process, which occurs every fall, there is an attestation statement that's included in the enrollment form where they're again disclosing and signing off on an attestation statement that they've provided us with that information. It's not 100%, but we're getting closer.
there, so there is, let's say there's a change, and I know we're doing this, you know, when someone's doing their thing, but is it part, and this is a problem when you have union contracts, because it may not be in part of the contract, but is there a duty to self-report, so someone picks a position, you know, they're wherever they want to be, and it just so happens that their husband is the head of that department, is there a duty to report, or there's no duty to report?
There is a duty.
Continuously?
We have, the board approved our code of ethics, and there is, I believe it's Code of Ethics 5.2 that describes that requirement for our employees to comply with that code of ethics and report.
And is there a, I guess, because that's more than one of my follow-ups, but is, and if you don't do, is there a consequence for not self-reporting? 'Cause, I mean, they're the people who know, so like, you know, we're all, the people in this room are sitting, you know, can be very removed from the rank and file of what's going on. And so certainly someone would know if they're reporting directly or indirectly to the relationship. So, and if they don't self-report, is there a consequence for that, or is just a, oh, sorry?
There's, that's not in my umbrella.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But we certainly have a performance code, an employee performance code. And we have, you know, you've heard Scott Ferraro up here giving presentations, our senior director of labor and employee relations. Scott oversees our formal positive discipline program, and he'll work with the hiring manager, and he'll address those issues, certainly with some consultation with our legal department.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Any other comments for management? Well, Tony, I want to thank you then, if we don't have any other items today, for the update and for your team's update. I thought it was very comprehensive, and I appreciate you highlighting the certain areas that are still under consideration and receiving attention.
Thank you. Thank you to my team, too.
Yep. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned. All of those in favor? Aye. Foregone conclusion.